Rejected as family. A 25-year-old trust proved the truth. Hey everyone, the story you are about to hear was not built on fairy tales or fragile emotions but on records sealed in silence and patience sharpened by time. In the first few seconds, this narration invites you to breathe slowly, lean in, and remember to support the journey by liking, subscribing, and sharing, because stories like this rise only when truth is amplified. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion, where overlooked lives reclaim power and where this chapter begins with rejection that believed it was permanent. The narrator was born into a family that loved appearances more than blood and obedience more than fairness. From childhood onward, warmth was rationed and approval was conditional, measured by usefulness rather than care. Family gatherings felt like trials and milestones passed unnoticed. Yet beneath the surface, a trust existed, created 25 years earlier by a grandfather who understood patterns and prepared protection long before the truth would be demanded. That trust waited quietly, accumulating more than assets because it carried intention. As years unfolded, the narrator learned self-reliance early, washing away illusions with discipline and focus. Education became refuge and work became armor. Every slight carved clarity and every exclusion sharpened resolve. The family labeled the narrator difficult, ungrateful, and distant while benefiting from the silence that kept the past buried. They assumed rejection would weaken spirit and erase belonging. They were wrong, because distance became strategy and patience became power. On the 25th birthday, the family repeated their ritual of absence. There were no gestures of inclusion, only reminders that the narrator was peripheral. Yet elsewhere, documents stirred as trustees prepared notices and accountants reconciled years of growth. The trust had matured exactly as designed, and the conditions had been met with integrity and endurance. Proof was ready to surface, and the truth would no longer be negotiable. The narrator remembered fragments of a grandfather who watched quietly, who never raised his voice, and who understood the difference between love and control. That memory became a compass during nights when loneliness pressed hard. The trust was not about money alone but about validation beyond opinion. It represented recognition that had been denied publicly yet preserved privately with precision. As the day closed, an email arrived, not dramatic yet undeniable. Numbers aligned, signatures were verified, and the legal language confirmed autonomy. The trust belonged solely to the narrator, with instructions emphasizing independence, education, and ethical stewardship. There were clauses acknowledging family conflict and insulating the assets from interference. The structure itself told a story of foresight and protection. Shock gave way to calm and then to purpose. The narrator did not rush to announce or retaliate. Instead, plans formed carefully, focusing on stability, philanthropy, and long-term impact. The realization settled that rejection had been temporary while truth had been patient. Power did not need applause to exist. Meanwhile, the family continued their assumptions, believing control remained unchallenged. They spoke through actions of exclusion and through habits of disregard. They did not know that balance had shifted and that their version of the past was about to be audited by reality. The narrator prepared quietly, meeting advisors, building knowledge, and aligning values. Each step honored the grandfather intent to empower without spectacle. The trust funded education programs, supported community initiatives, and secured personal freedom. These choices contrasted sharply with the family narrative of failure and dependence. As weeks passed, subtle changes appeared. The narrator no longer sought permission or approval. Decisions were grounded and boundaries firm. The family sensed distance but misread it as weakness. They mistook silence for submission and patience for fear. In private moments, reflection expanded beyond finances into identity. The narrator recognized patterns of gaslighting, minimized achievements, and conditional acceptance that had shaped self-doubt. Understanding reframed pain into information and turned wounds into maps. Therapy, journaling, and disciplined routines reinforced balance, ensuring that sudden resources would not distort character. This internal work mattered as much as any ledger. The trust language encouraged responsibility, requiring annual reporting and ethical investment. Rather than indulgence, the narrator chose sustainability, prioritizing health, education, and mentorship. Each allocation felt like a quiet correction to years of dismissal, proving that worth did not need endorsement from those who withheld it. The family history revealed itself through records and recollections. There were debts of gratitude ignored, promises broken, and sacrifices overlooked. The grandfather had watched these dynamics and responded with structure instead of confrontation. His solution protected the vulnerable and constrained the entitled without spectacle. That wisdom echoed, now guiding restraint. Preparation included legal briefings and security measures to prevent manipulation. The narrator anticipated tactics of guilt, urgency, and revisionism. Boundaries were rehearsed and documentation organized. Calm replaced anxiety because readiness breeds confidence. Publicly nothing changed, yet internally momentum gathered. The narrator scheduled a simple meeting and drafted a factual summary supported by documents. There would be no accusations, only evidence. The goal was not revenge but clarity, accountability, and closure. Truth would speak for itself. The night before the meeting, sleep came easily for the first time in years. Acceptance arrived not from others but from alignment with purpose. The narrator understood that family is defined by behavior and that legacy is measured by impact. The trust had matured, and so had the person it protected. What comes next would not be loud, but it would be decisive, creating a natural pause before the reckoning unfolds in the next chapter. The pause thickened with resolve, discipline, and unshakable patience. The narrator entered the next phase with documents aligned, advisors briefed, and values clarified. This was not a confrontation but an unveiling shaped by facts and timelines. The trust stood as a mirror reflecting behavior across decades. The meeting occurred in a neutral setting chosen for its formality and record-keeping. Papers moved calmly across the table as the narrator maintained composure. The evidence outlined the trust origin, growth, and conditions without commentary. Dates, signatures, and audits replaced speculation. The structure did the speaking. Reactions were immediate yet contained within process. Assumptions cracked as comprehension spread. The family had relied on control through ambiguity, and now clarity dismantled leverage. The narrator observed without satisfaction, understanding that power grounded in truth does not require display. Attempts at reframing emerged through body language and procedural delays. However, safeguards anticipated these moves. Legal provisions restricted interference and timelines compelled acknowledgement. The narrator remained steady, focused on outcomes rather than emotions. Beyond the room, consequences began to ripple. Access to resources shifted and narratives required revision. The family faced the difference between perception and record. Years of dismissal were catalogued not as grievances but as context explaining why the trust existed. Accountability arrived quietly. The narrator redirected energy toward constructive goals. Education funds expanded, partnerships formed, and mentorship networks launched. Each initiative honored the grandfather vision to uplift beyond lineage. Community impact replaced personal vindication as the central metric. Media interest surfaced through public filings, yet the narrator declined attention. Privacy preserved integrity and prevented distortion. The work mattered more than recognition. This restraint contrasted sharply with past portrayals of inadequacy. Internally, healing progressed. Boundaries held firm and contact was limited to formal channels. The narrator practiced compassion without surrendering standards. Forgiveness became possible without reconciliation because safety and respect remained prerequisites. The family sought recalibration through intermediaries proposing proximity to resources. The narrator evaluated these overtures against documented patterns and declined entanglement. Independence remained non-negotiable. The trust clauses reinforced separation, protecting the mission from compromise. Weeks turned into months as systems stabilized. Returns funded scholarships and sustainable ventures. Reports demonstrated measurable outcomes, validating the disciplined approach. The narrator found fulfillment in building rather than correcting. Reflection acknowledged grief for what never existed alongside gratitude for what now flourished. The past lost its grip as the present gained coherence. The trust had proven the truth not to punish but to illuminate. The chapter approaches a turning point as an external audit prepared to publish summaries that would formalize accountability. The narrator anticipated closure while remaining grounded. The story advanced toward resolution shaped by integrity rather than noise, creating a natural break before the deeper reckoning continues. The audit process unfolded methodically, examining compliance, governance, and impact. Independent reviewers verified that funds were allocated according to mandate and that decision-making followed ethical guidelines. Transparency fortified credibility, ensuring that outcomes could withstand scrutiny. The narrator welcomed this examination, recognizing that legitimacy grows through openness. As findings accumulated, a clearer picture emerged of historical dynamics. The family pattern of extraction without stewardship contrasted starkly with the trust architecture of sustainability. This contrast reframed past conflicts as structural rather than personal. Understanding reduced bitterness and increased resolve. The narrator invested time in leadership development, learning to scale programs responsibly. Advisors emphasized resilience, diversification, and community partnership. These lessons translated into long-term planning that insulated initiatives from volatility. Each decision echoed the grandfather preference for quiet strength. Personal routines supported equilibrium. Health practices, mindfulness, and service grounded the narrator, preventing burnout. Balance became a form of resistance against chaos previously imposed by rejection. Stability proved that survival could evolve into stewardship. The external summaries approached publication, triggering adjustments within the family sphere. Legal counsel advised compliance, and public statements shifted tone. The narrator did not engage beyond necessary confirmations, maintaining distance that preserved clarity. Opportunities multiplied as organizations recognized reliable support. Collaborations expanded reach without diluting mission. The narrator measured success through lives improved rather than applause. This metric sustained humility. Memory of childhood resurfaced with softened edges. The narrator acknowledged the resilience forged through hardship and released the need for validation. Identity settled independent of lineage. When publication day arrived, the summaries confirmed governance excellence and mission alignment. Accountability was established without spectacle. The truth stood documented, accessible, and final. The narrator marked the moment, privately honoring the grandfather foresight. Gratitude replaced anger and purpose replaced pain. The path ahead focused on continuity, not confrontation. The pause invites reflection before the ultimate outcomes are revealed in the next chapter. Readiness felt calm, deliberate, and earned through patience, practice, and proof. The narrator understood that endings are choices shaped by courage, consistency, and care. With foundations secured and vision clear, the path forward required no permission. This pause honors growth before final resolution arrives. Accountability settled like weather, steady, predictable, and fair, closing a season of doubt and opening space for legacy defined by service, stewardship, and truth. The silence now carried confidence, direction, and lasting peace within reach. With accountability documented and legacy aligned, the narrator entered a phase where power was no longer reactive but intentional. This chapter is not about exposure but about consequence, the kind that unfolds quietly yet permanently. After the audit summaries became public, the atmosphere around the narrator changed in subtle but undeniable ways. Invitations arrived framed as collaboration rather than control. Institutions that once overlooked potential now recognized reliability. The narrator evaluated every opportunity through a single lens: alignment with purpose. Growth without direction was rejected because the trust was never meant to inflate ego but to extend impact. Inside the family sphere, the silence deepened. Attempts to rewrite history lost momentum when faced with verified records. The absence of argument became its own admission. The narrator felt neither triumph nor regret, only clarity. The past no longer demanded response because it had been documented and resolved. Closure does not always arrive with apologies, sometimes it arrives with acceptance of facts. The narrator focused on expanding programs that reflected lived understanding. Scholarships prioritized students who had navigated rejection yet demonstrated discipline. Mentorship paired experience with empathy, ensuring that support addressed both skill and confidence. Each success story reinforced the idea that belonging can be built rather than inherited. Governance structures matured alongside initiatives. Boards diversified, risk assessments strengthened, and reporting cycles refined. The narrator learned that ethical power requires systems that outlast individuals. This lesson echoed the grandfather foresight and validated the trust design. Sustainability became the highest form of respect for the gift received. Internally, the narrator confronted lingering narratives shaped by years of exclusion. Moments of doubt surfaced unexpectedly, triggered by old environments or familiar patterns. Instead of resisting these moments, the narrator acknowledged them as remnants rather than truths. Therapy and reflection reframed self-perception, reinforcing worth independent of recognition. Healing progressed in layers, steady and deliberate. As months passed, the family attempted indirect engagement through shared acquaintances and public gestures. The narrator responded with neutrality, maintaining boundaries without hostility. Respect was granted through distance and consistency. This approach prevented re-entanglement and protected momentum. Financial stewardship demanded vigilance. Markets shifted and advisors proposed adjustments. The narrator balanced caution with opportunity, ensuring that risk aligned with mission. Transparency remained non-negotiable and audits continued regularly. Trust thrives where oversight is welcomed rather than feared. Community impact grew measurable and tangible. Graduation rates improved, programs scaled, and mentorship outcomes exceeded projections. These results attracted further partnerships, expanding reach without compromising values. The narrator learned to say no as confidently as yes, preserving focus amid abundance. Public curiosity intensified, yet the narrator declined personal profiles. The work remained the message. This restraint frustrated those who sought spectacle but strengthened credibility among partners. Influence expanded without personality branding, proving that leadership can be quiet and effective. The narrator revisited the grandfather journals discovered among archived documents. Entries revealed concern for fairness and warnings against entitlement. These writings affirmed choices made and offered guidance during complex decisions. The bond across time deepened, reinforcing responsibility to steward wisely. As the year turned, the narrator faced a choice regarding reconciliation. Legal avenues allowed for final settlements, clarifying inheritance disputes and closing remaining ambiguities. After consultation, the narrator proceeded with resolutions that ensured permanence. This step was not punitive but preventative, protecting the mission from future interference. The settlements concluded efficiently, leaving no room for reinterpretation. The family narrative reached its endpoint not through argument but through finality. The narrator experienced relief akin to setting down a heavy object carried too long. Freedom expanded in the space left behind. Attention returned fully to future building. The narrator initiated leadership pipelines, empowering others to replicate programs regionally. Knowledge transfer ensured scalability and resilience. This decentralization honored the trust intent to multiply impact beyond a single steward. Personal life flourished alongside purpose. Relationships formed on mutual respect rather than obligation. The narrator cultivated joy without guilt, understanding that well-being fuels service. Balance became a discipline, protecting longevity. The chapter approaches its turning as an unexpected letter arrived from a former family member, not seeking resources but offering acknowledgement. The narrator read it without urgency, allowing emotions to surface without dictating action. Recognition can heal, but it does not rewrite boundaries. After reflection, the narrator chose a measured response, affirming humanity while maintaining distance. Compassion was extended without reopening doors that had closed for safety. This decision marked growth, distinguishing forgiveness from access. The narrator stood at a vantage point, observing a transformed life shaped by patience, foresight, and integrity. Rejection had forged clarity, and the trust had proven truth not through confrontation but through structure. The journey now shifted from validation to legacy. The next phase will test continuity and reveal whether systems built can endure beyond the origin story. The pause invites anticipation as the narrative moves toward culmination, where legacy faces its final proving ground. By now, the narrator had transformed rejection into strategy, silence into authority, and patience into leverage. The journey had moved from reaction to orchestration. This chapter is about fortifying what had been achieved and preparing for the inevitable tests of endurance and influence. With the trust fully operational and all family disputes legally resolved, the narrator turned attention to sustainability. Early successes had proved potential, but lasting impact required structure, foresight, and discipline. Every initiative was audited internally and externally, not out of distrust, but because legacy demands transparency. Processes were refined, redundancies built, and long-term vision documented in precise operational guides. The narrator's world was no longer fragile. It was resilient by design. Projects under the trust multiplied. Education programs expanded into underfunded regions. Scholarships reached beyond traditional beneficiaries, and mentorship programs bridged the gap between potential and opportunity. Each new initiative was not a reaction to past slights but a proactive assertion of influence. The narrator realized that true empowerment doesn't just prove personal worth, it extends it. Communities that had once been ignored or overlooked now received structured guidance and resources. Lives changed quietly but profoundly, creating ripples that would eventually reach far beyond immediate awareness. Meanwhile, the family's attempts to regain relevance continued, though now subtle and mostly indirect. Invitations framed as reconciliation arrived, social media posts hinted at newfound awareness of past wrongs, and mutual acquaintances approached the narrator seeking insight or leverage. But each overture was measured against documented reality and the principles of the trust. There was no room for manipulation, guilt, or emotional coercion. Where others saw opportunity to provoke, the narrator saw clarity and acted with calculated restraint. The past had taught discernment. The present demanded discipline. Internally, the narrator's focus sharpened. Emotional resilience deepened through reflection and mindfulness. Childhood wounds resurfaced intermittently, triggered by familiar scenarios or subtle reminders of exclusion, but these moments no longer dictated decisions. Journals, therapy, and disciplined routines reinforced the distinction between memory and reality. Rejection, once crippling, was now merely data. A lesson informing strategy rather than an obstacle to overcome. The trust's financial and operational growth brought its own set of challenges. Markets shifted, regulations changed, and advisors proposed risky ventures that tested ethical boundaries. Every decision was weighed not only for profit but for alignment with the mission. The narrator refused shortcuts or indulgences. The legacy built was larger than personal gain. It was a blueprint for responsible stewardship. In this way, each challenge became a reaffirmation of values rather than a temptation to revert to old patterns. During this period, the narrator also initiated an advisory council composed of individuals whose judgment, integrity, and expertise were unquestioned. These were not relatives seeking access, nor allies motivated by status, but carefully selected collaborators who shared vision and could critique decisions objectively. Their input strengthened governance, added accountability, and insulated the mission from future disruption. Through this, the narrator realized that independence and collaboration could coexist when boundaries were respected and purpose was shared. As momentum built, public recognition arrived, but on the narrator's terms. Media coverage focused on the measurable impact of initiatives rather than personal drama. Profiles highlighted systemic change, not individual triumphs. This restraint ensured credibility and preserved privacy. Influence spread not because of spectacle, but because of evidence and ethical execution. The narrator understood that authentic authority never needs validation. It generates respect silently, inevitably, and durably. Family attempts at reconciliation became increasingly symbolic. Some reached out in private, others through intermediaries, all expecting gratitude or acknowledgement. The narrator responded carefully, distinguishing acknowledgement from access. Compassion was offered, but boundaries remained firm. The chapter underscores that empowerment does not require approval from those who once withheld it. It thrives independently. Unexpectedly, the narrator faced a public challenge. A former associate with partial knowledge of the trust and its history attempted to distort facts, presenting a narrative designed to question competence and intent. The narrator met this threat with preparation rather than confrontation. Documentation, transparency, and calm rebuttals dismantled the distortion without drama. The episode reinforced that true authority relies on evidence, not emotion, and that legacy must withstand scrutiny. As months passed, a sense of equilibrium emerged. Programs flourished, finances remained ethical and secure, personal life stabilized, and public perception aligned with reality. The narrator experienced a rare clarity. The work was no longer reactive, no longer proof of self-worth, but an authentic extension of identity and purpose. Past rejection now appeared not as a wound but as an instrument, shaping resilience, precision, and judgment. The narrator received unexpected correspondence from a distant community leader who had observed the trust's initiatives. The letter acknowledged the narrator's impact, not as fame but as tangible transformation. Gratitude was offered without expectation, and validation arrived in its purest form. Evidence of lives improved. This reinforced a critical truth. Legacy is measured not by recognition but by effect. Rejection had once defined identity. Now, stewardship defined influence. Systems, relationships, and reputation had matured into a self-sustaining network capable of outlasting any individual challenge. The pause at this juncture feels deliberate, a natural breather before the final chapter where ultimate reconciliation, reflection, and enduring legacy converge. The horizon ahead is not one of drama but of consequence. What comes next will confirm whether the seeds planted over decades, through patience, strategy, and discipline, truly take root across generations. The narrator, steady and deliberate, prepares to witness the culmination of a journey that began in rejection and now moves toward transcendence. The narrator, now fully autonomous, fully prepared, and fully aligned with purpose, steps into a space defined not by reaction but by authority. Decades of patience, discipline, and strategic foresight reach their apex. Rejection no longer holds weight. Legacy commands reality. This chapter is about resolution, proof, and the enduring impact of choices made long before recognition existed. The first weeks of the chapter are deliberate. The narrator reviews every operational system, every mentorship program, and every financial allocation. Nothing is left to chance. Each initiative is stress-tested against ethical standards, sustainability metrics, and long-term goals. Advisory councils weigh in, offering perspectives grounded in expertise rather than sentiment. Every detail affirms that what has been built is resilient, replicable, and insulated from interference. Meanwhile, the family, those who once defined identity through exclusion, now face undeniable truth. Legal closure, audit verification, and public transparency leave no room for reinterpretation. Attempts at manipulation are deflected with documentation, calm authority, and firm boundaries. The narrator does not gloat. There is no need. Silence and structure speak louder than any confrontation ever could. The past, once a tool of subjugation, now exists only as context for triumph. Public recognition grows, but again on the narrator's terms. Awards and acknowledgments are framed not around personal storylines, but around measurable outcomes. Education programs flourish, scholarships transform futures, and mentorship networks scale beyond initial projections. Media coverage emphasizes impact rather than drama, and the narrator's presence remains grounded, intentional, and disciplined. Authority is earned quietly, sustained permanently, and unassailable. Personal growth reaches its zenith. The narrator, free from the constraints of familial validation, cultivates relationships defined by respect, trust, and mutual growth. Emotional wounds of the past, once raw and corrosive, have transformed into maps of resilience. Reflection and therapy, journaling, and disciplined routines ensure that balance is maintained, even as influence expands. Happiness now exists independently, not contingent upon recognition or inclusion. A pivotal moment arrives when a distant family member, previously absent or hostile, approaches, not for resources, not for validation, but for acknowledgement of truth. The narrator responds thoughtfully, offering recognition of humanity while preserving boundaries. Forgiveness is granted internally, not accessed externally. This is reconciliation on the narrator's terms. Mature, controlled, and grounded in principle. It is proof that power can coexist with compassion without sacrificing autonomy. Simultaneously, the trust initiatives reach full operational maturity. Projects now operate with autonomy under trained leadership, financial stewardship is impeccable, and reporting structures guarantee transparency for decades to come. The narrator's influence extends far beyond personal life. It reshapes communities, transforms access to education, and demonstrates a model of ethical power. The grandfather's foresight, embedded in the trust 25 years earlier, has manifested fully: protection, autonomy, and purposeful influence. Unexpected recognition arrives in the form of testimonials from program beneficiaries. Stories of lives changed, opportunities seized, and dreams realized flood in. Unlike the family's shallow gestures, these acknowledgments are genuine, transformative, and evidence-based. For the narrator, this is ultimate validation. Proof that worth is measured by impact, not approval. Legacy has been achieved, and it is tangible, measurable, and enduring. Internally, the narrator reflects on the journey. Rejection, once painful and defining, is now reframed as the catalyst for growth. The trust, once an abstract structure, has proven the truth of intention over perception, strategy over sentiment. Decisions guided by patience, integrity, and foresight have delivered both justice and empowerment. The The narrator understands fully that authority grounded in principle is invincible precisely because it does not rely on the fragile acknowledgement of others. The final weeks of this chapter, and of the story, focus on consolidation, mentorship, and succession. The narrator ensures that systems are resilient, leaders are trained, and communities are empowered to sustain initiatives without dependence. Each program is codified, each process documented, each principle reinforced. Legacy is now structural, not personal. It is a force capable of outlasting individuals, families, and even fleeting moments of conflict. The narrator experiences a profound clarity. Life is no longer about proving worth to those who withheld recognition but about creating structures that amplify value for those who deserve it. The past, once a source of pain, is now merely context. The future, shaped by deliberate choices, is a testament to resilience, strategy, and ethical power. Rejection is transformed into authority and patience into legacy. The narrator stands on a quiet evening overlooking programs in full operation, data confirming impact, and lives quietly transformed. The 25-year-old trust has proven its truth, not as a weapon, not as a spectacle, but as a mechanism for justice, empowerment, and enduring influence. Rejection has been eclipsed, authority established, and legacy secured. The story concludes not with noise or vengeance, but with calm certainty, proof in hand, and purpose realized. The pause here is final, reflective, and complete. What began as exclusion ends in transcendence. Systems, values, and vision now outlast personal conflict. What remains is the story of a life shaped not by those who rejected it but by the patient, deliberate, and unassailable power of truth. The journey is over, but its effects will resonate across generations.